So chapter 2 is still microeconomics. We're looking at the market system. There are your outcomes that you're going to have a look at. An overview of this chapter says we're going to look at the market system. We're going to look at something called the basic economic problem. We're going to look at demand and supply, the elasticity of demand, the elasticity of supply. We're going to look at market failure, interference in the markets, and economies of scale. All right. Not a particularly difficult chapter, but you need to learn the basics. It kind of forms the foundation on the whole of the economics section going forward. All right, so let's look at the basic economic problem. So all of these things are discussed in your textbook, so I will just draw your attention to the examples from the textbook when we need them. All right, so the problem that we have is our resources are very scarce, and we want to know how to allocate these. So given that resources are limited and scarce, it's not possible to make everything that everybody wants, and there are unlimited ones. All societies are thus faced with a fundamental economic problem of what should we produce, how many should we make, who should make them, who must buy them, or who must get them. All right, so your possible solutions then would be that you have three types of economies. A command economy, where the decision is made by the government and he says you will do this, you will do that. Or a free market economy, where you look at market forces and price mechanisms to determine what you're going to make, how much you're going to make, and who you're going to, and how much you're going to charge for it. And then a mixed economy is just a mixture of the lot. So that little bit of theory is on page 32 in your textbook, where you can go and read a little bit more about it. But that's your economic problem and possible solutions. So what is this price mechanism that they mentioned over there? Okay. Price mechanism is looking at supply and demand. So to allocate scarce resources in a free market, the quantity and the price of the goods supplied are determined by an interaction of supply and demand. The market price will be set by what we call an invisible hand of the market, and that's where the two graphs intersect. So if this is your supply line, this is your demand line, where the two intersect, that means we all agree on a specific price and a specific quantity, and that's how we find how much we should produce and what price should we ask for it. Okay, let's look at supply and demand just quickly individually. If you think of demand, separate lines, Patricia. If you look at demand, and it's about quantity demanded, or the demand in general, your price is always on the y-axis and your quantity always on the x-axis. If your price is very high, how many people are going to buy your product? Very few. So high price, low quantity. High price, low quantity. If your price is very low, then many people would be interested in buying your product. And that is why the demand line has a negative slope. Is that easy enough? Now let's look at supply. Supply is the opposite. So let's just label that demand, and this one supply. Still price on your y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, and this is not about how much is supplied in the market, because that's basically your demand. It's about how much do you want to supply from a producer's point of view. If a producer can charge anything they like, if they can charge a high price, then they will want to produce more. Do you agree? Because the more they produce, the more they can make in profits. So when the price is high, they want to produce lots, because lots means lots of money. But when the price is low, they go, what do I want to do that for? This is cheap stuff. I'm not interested in this. So when the price is low, they tend to want to produce less. And that's why the supply line goes that way. Does that make sense to you? So think of supply from a producer point of view, from a profit point of view. If something is more expensive, your profits could be, if the selling price is higher, your profits could be higher. If your selling price is very low, your profits could be very low. Not how much must you produce, how much will you want to produce. Does that make sense? It's not quantity demanded and quantity supplied. That is on this line, quantity demanded and quantity supplied. The general demand is showing the relationship of a product in a segment of the market. All right, we're going to get into much more detail now. Are you happy with why the one's positive, why the one's negative? So the supplier says, I want to supply, and if I can charge P1, or this price over here, let's call it P1, then I can produce so many, and the demand says, well, at that price, I'll also buy so many, and that's where we meet an agreed price. You happy with that? And above that, the demander goes, no, I don't want this, and the supplier goes, okay, fine, I'll bring my price down. The demander says, right, I'll bring my quantity up, and we meet somewhere in the middle. All right, so that's supply and demand. Very easy, very simple, and it'll never change. Right, so demand, looking at individual and market demand. So for example, if you've got 6 markets and they've each got a little demand curve, and each little demand curve looks like this, then when you add them together, you'll have the whole market's demand curve. It's rocket science, eh? Your demand plus my demand gives you our demand. Your price plus my price, your quantity plus my quantity gives you our price and our quantity. Does that make sense? So you literally just add everybody's stuff together. All right, so the individual demand represents the amount that a consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given price. We call that effective demand. Market demand shows the total amount of the effective demand of all the customers or consumers in a market, and that is what we call the aggregate. Aggregate is when you add them together. So what factors influence individual demand? Or what factors, influence the demand for a product? The price of the good, obviously, will affect it, because obviously if it's more expensive, then your demand will go down, because then you'll rather buy something else, all right? So if Lindt chocolate is too expensive, well, then we'll just buy Cadbury's, you know what I'm saying? You'll just substitute it. However, if you look at the price of other goods, you might say, for example, is this a substitute, like Cadbury's and Lindt? Or is this a complementary good, like cell phones? If you buy cell phones and the cell phone price goes up, well, then you'll be buying covers as well. They complement each other. Okay, so if the demand for the one goes up, then the demand for the other will also go up. All right, and income, the more you earn, the more you can pay, right? You'll buy the more expensive car if you can afford it. Now let's just look at normal goods versus inferior goods. A normal good is, well, if I have more money, I will buy more goods. So in your textbooks, let's just quickly look where this is so that you can have a look at the formal definitions. And let me just find it quickly. Hold on a sec. Basically, page 35, it tells you the conditions of demand are as follows. So that's your factors that influence your demand. So when you look at income, which is their first bullet in the textbook, if you are, for example, a high income earner, is jewelry and cars might be a normal good for you, but not for anyone else. So if your income is higher, then you might not buy the cheap car, you might go and buy a more expensive car. But if it is chocolates, that's normal. Hey, the more you earn, the more you can buy. So if it's an inferior good, the demand might go down because income went up, because it's a cheap car. What do you want a cheap car when you're earning so much? Silly example. Do you see the difference? So demand can go up for a normal good if the price comes down, but for an inferior good, if the price comes down, or your income, if you've got more money, normal good, you'll want more. Inferior good, you go, I don't want this anymore. The demand will come down. Does that make sense? Luxury cars and so on. Tastes and fashion, same sort of thing. Could be influenced by advertising. Hopefully not subliminal, just literally when a Coca-Cola comes on the TV, don't you get lists for the Coke? I do, but anyway, that's just me. And when you watch cooking programs, don't you get hungry? It's the same sort of thing. It makes you want more. Other factors, population size, credit terms, and so on. All right. Then they go back, these little 2 graphs here. So it's not quite in the order of the textbook, but it is all there on those couple of pages. So when changes in price occurs, price is one of the things on your curve. That will influence the quantity demanded. Meaning, if your price is here, you will demand this quantity. But if your price is there, you will demand that quantity. Does that make sense? You call that movements along the curve. When price goes up, we call that a contraction. Why? Because when prices are going up, your quantity demanded goes down. Quantity demanded will decrease. Does that make sense? Remember, this is demand, not price. This is a demand curve, not a price curve. Does that make sense? Doesn't necessarily have to be straight either, but we just draw it straight to keep it simple. So when your price goes up, your quantity goes down. However, when your price goes down, the quantity demanded will go up. Quantity demanded will go up, and it's a demand curve, which means we expand our demand. You happy with that? And that means it's along the curve, so you don't move the actual graph. However, if you change something that is not price and quantity related, in other words, you change one of these factors, one of those factors, price of other goods, and income and so on, then that could change the entire demand, as in at the same price, you might demand there, but because of other factors, suddenly you demand a different quantity. Then we call it a shift in demand in general. So quantity demanded is a point on this line. Does that make sense? Demand curve is the relationship between price and quantity. So if I can illustrate it like this, here's your, let me just use straight line, sorry. I have the facility, let me use it. So that would be the difference, let me keep to this, between your demand curve doing this. That's one relationship. Another relationship could be your demand curve does that. Another relationship could be your demand curve does that. You know what I'm saying? You with me? So a point on the demand curve is a contraction or an expansion. A change in the relationship, which way it moves, it could move in any direction. That one's possibly a little bit skew, but you've got the idea. Okay? That relationship can move the curve or change its slope, which means the relationship changes. The gradient, if you like, will change. Okay. If it shifts to the right, please remember we're talking about quantities demanded. Your quantity will increase. Demand increases when it moves to the right. If it moves to the left, means your quantity will decrease. Remember, this is a demand curve, not a price curve. So always think in terms of demand will go up or down. Quantity is demanded. Prices are not demanded. All right, so just understand the difference. And guys, once you understand demand properly, supply goes easy, because it's literally the opposite. So that is then the nutshell of demand. You can have a look. It talks about it on page 34, contraction versus expansion, and then the movement of the actual demand curve to the right or to the left. Right is up, left is down. That leads us to our next little section.